This is one of my personal favourite patterns. I love the fabric choices that you can make and the fact that you've got decorative cross stitch to make it different, give a new texture. It gives a new twist to a classic. Also, the subtle patchwork style is very pleasing and relatively easy to achieve. It's Simplicity 1633 and I'm going to make View B the striped cushion. The first step is to get the pattern instruction sheet out and take a look and see what pieces you need. All of the pieces are numbered and listed so that you can see. You look at the view you're going to make. This time I'm making View B, a 20-inch cushion, and I will need all of the pieces that have View B next to them. So I have ringed the layout I'm going to follow. The first step is to cut out the pattern pieces that you need. So I need 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I'm going to cut them on a single layer of fabric as it shows here on the pattern sheet. And it also shows me the directional arrows which will be on the tissue pieces and they have to be parallel to the selvage. This is important for two reasons. Generally because it makes sure you cut on a straight of grain so there's no unwanted stretch. And in this instance it's particularly important because I have striped pieces. Some are going to have horizontal stripes, some are going to have vertical stripes, and this just makes sure that the right ones are cut in the right way without me having to think about it. Here are two of the pieces ready cut out. As you can see, the grain line, which was parallel to the selvage edge, actually is also in line with my stripes. Same on this one, I've got a vertical line and vertical stripes. Now I'm going to join them together by matching my notches. So again, I've cut the notches outwards, not into the seam allowance. This is the cutting line, this is the stitching line. So on this instance, I'm going to put them right sides together. I match my notches, pin them at right angles so that when I'm sewing, I can whip those pins out. So I shall be sewing down with the seam allowance as shown here, which is about 1 centimetre. Sew that edge to make my one strip, and then that will then join on to some of the other strips. Ready to sew this seam, I have moved my needle over to the left to get my 1 centimetre seam allowance so I can use the edge of the presser foot. Alternatively, of course, I could have used the markings on the throat plate here. So just forward and back to lock the stitches and then sew the seam. And I am pulling the pins out as I get to them. And now I need to press that seam open. And then I can join this piece to my other pieces. All the instructions on how to join this are in the pattern. This is one I've already done. So I'm now going to match the notches again. So I have a notch here, and along this edge I will have a notch. There it is, you can just see it. So the idea is that those notches should match up, and then I will have my stripes and my pieces all joining together nicely. So it's a case of joining all of these pieces together, following the instructions as to which piece to join first. So now that's my one panel. I'm going to press those seams and then I'm ready to add the very special detail on this particular cushion, which is cross stitch. And I'm going to do the cross stitch over the seams. I'm going to show you how to do it very quickly rather than stitch by stitch. And I'm going to use a white thread. Of course, you could use a coloured thread as well. So I'll show you how that looks. So just a real contrast to make it a real splash of colour that could perhaps pick out some tone in your decor. But the first thing to do is to press those seams, and you should always press a seam before you stitch over it again. I'm now going to do the cross stitch, and I'm going to do it very quickly in rows as opposed to each stitch as a cross. So I put a knot in my thread and come up from the underside. The seam is down here, so I'm just going to go across, and I'm actually doing stitches that are going to be quite big, and they are about 1/4 inch or 6mm either side of the seam. So I've gone from the top left down to the bottom right, straight across to the left again, pull that through, and go down again. And so I'm just going to start off with a series of diagonal lines, and I keep on going down. And you can do all of the seams, some of the seams. You can do this in a thread colour like I have done here, which is a white to pick up the white stripe, or of course you can do it in a contrast colour. If you're not working with a nice striped fabric like this, you could of course draw lines either side of the seam so that you can follow a nice neat line and try and keep those crosses nice and even. So if I just do one more, and then I'll start going back the other way just to show you how to get the cross stitch. So I would go all the way down, but I'm just going to show you how to get the cross. So having gone to the bottom, I'm going to go back up. So this time I'm going from the bottom left to the top right, almost in the same hole that I made for the last diagonal, and then across. Bottom, top right, and across. So as I'm pulling it through, I'm trying not to pull it too tight. So every now and then I'm patterning it. Now I'm using embroidery floss, and I'm using the 6 strands. In the pattern it says to use 3 strands, so you could use it finer, or if you don't want to use the stranded thread like this, you could actually use a crochet cotton. So it's quite a nice thick cotton to make them really stand out. So I've done a couple of examples of cross stitching. Here I've used the white, so it picks up the white in the cushion. And here I've used a real contrast of red to really zing out. So it's entirely up to you what you do. And also the size of the cross stitches. So here they're fairly small and neat. They've been pressed as well. Or on the white again, you can see they're bigger. So again, you decide, that's up to you. It's the beauty of making your own things. Having cross-stitched all of the seams, which I haven't done yet, but just to show you, cross-stitch all the seams, then you lay the back of the cushion right side up, the front of the cushion right side down, and stitch around the outside edge, leaving a turning gap in one of the edges, but between the seams rather than with a seam involved. So a turning gap of about that big in one edge, so that you can turn it through and stuff it with the cushion. Cushion pad is now inside, so the last thing to do is to slip stitch the opening closed, and then it keeps that permanently closed. It's a lovely quick cushion cover to make, and some of it can be done sitting in front of the television or indeed in the garden. Then doing the same, go along just a couple of millimetres and bring it back to the front edge, slipping the needle along the fold and bringing it back to the other side, and then doing the same. Go along just a couple of millimetres and bring it back to the front edge,